All right. Welcome, everybody. I believe we are live. We're going to give everybody just a minute to join here with us. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Thursday. For me, it's morning. I'm on the West Coast. I don't know if you're on the East Coast. Happy afternoon to you. We'll just give it one more minute here. Make sure people can join. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. And for anybody who does end up joining late, we will be sending out a recording of this as well. Okay, well, welcome to Teach Your Sales Manager How to Lead. So my name is Joe Freeman. I run a company called Digitopia, and we specialize specifically in operations for marketing and sales. So bringing your marketing to sales to life in your CRM. So whether that's HubSpot, whether that's Salesforce, high level or other, we really specialize in that. And we come across all the time sales leaders who could use some help becoming sales leaders. So I partnered up here with Eddie. So we've got Eddie here today, and he is from Metis. And he has he's supported by Sales Acceleration, and he has 30 years of domestic and international sales leadership experience. And currently, he's a fractional sales leader helping SMBs achieve revenue growth that they've been trying to achieve forever. So they start working with Eddie, and he helps get them there. And so, one of the biggest questions we get all the time is, why is my sales leader not being effective? And I think what happens for a lot of people is they either promote, their top salesperson to be the manager as they grow their team, or they go out and they buy a hot shot or they hire a hot shot salesperson and they bring him in and they think that's going to be the silver bullet, and it just isn't. And then it feels like a real waste. It feels like a real bummer for everybody on both sides of that equation. And so the question we are asking today is, why is my sales leader not being effective? And what I'm going to do is hand this over to Eddie, because he's going to walk us through why that's happening and what you can do about that. So Eddie, the show is yours. Take it away.
Hey, thanks a lot, Joe. Really appreciate it. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody on the virtual world, and thank you for attending. Yes, 30 years of experience, man. I feel like I should be older or have a gray beard or something, but fortunately, I'm still young and good looking. So
You look
we'll go
28
for
years old.
Hey, so you hit it right on the money there, Joe. I've run in my career and then now in my role in medicine, helping small and medium-sized businesses. I've run into multiple business owners or just operations leaders or different entities, etc. And they keep saying, why is my sales leader not being effective? So this slide deck, it's not, it's teaching, obviously, it's partaking of some of my experience, but really it's designed for you to be cognizant of the things that you, as the leader or the business owner, however you want to position yourself, CFO, COO, etc., these are the conversations you're going to end up having with your newly promoted or newly hired sales leader, unless you have a clear path to what that means. Every single leadership role, regardless of the size of the company, is an investment. It's an investment into future growth. And unless you're prepared to treat it as such, you're probably going to crash and fail, unfortunately. And I've seen it. And this is not only for small and medium-sized businesses. This is all corporations. I've had the pleasure of working for a large variety of technology companies. I've had great leaders, and I've had leaders I question, etc. And I've seen them drag down the revenue, drag down the profitability due to lack of skill sets, regardless of what their background may or may not have been. So, without further ado, and if you have a question, etc., send it to Joe. We can stop at mid-stride. If I'm talking too much, just say, hey, you shut up and let me ask a question. We'll go for it there.
Perfect. I don't think anybody's going to say that.
At least you can't get yelled at virtually. You just text it. Hey, so we're gonna kind of concentrate on what Joe said, promoting from within. Listen, I am one of the biggest advocates of promotion. I believe it's inspiring. It provides a career path. It really makes sure, from a organizational standpoint, it retains the market knowledge. So you definitely have people who know both your corporate culture, your organizational culture, as well as the customers and the market itself, the cycles, how fluid it may be, how difficult it may be, etc. And it does inspire the rest of your organization, regardless of the functional group, to perform better. They know that, hey, if you do well and if you meet the metrics and meet the goals and you provide for growth, you may get promoted and get that nice title, that bump in pay, and everything else. And it definitely reduces costs. Nobody wants to pay recruiters, but you do need to pay a recruiter well. Side note on that one, if you're out there trying to hire. Now, there's a downside, though, to promoting from within if you haven't planned for it. There's an educator that established the Peter Principle. He's a doctor of education, and he came up with the concept that basically organizations that are hierarchical, the higher up you go, the more you get promoted, the less relevant or competent you are in that next step. And this is general, obviously. It's not a hard, fast rule. And not every VP of sales is an idiot, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But if you haven't planned for that person to succeed in that role, then the most likely scenario is, yeah, they'll get promoted, they go to title, but they won't be able to achieve their full potential. And you're going to be stuck with a position that you're paying for that's not meeting the expectations you would have wanted to have. So we're going to dive into some of these, like I've got put together based on experience and talking to people, 10 different talking points, things that most of the business owners will end up having as a discussion with that sales leader, newly promoted, especially.
And it's
So
interesting
leader,
what you just said
yeah.
because I think that is ubiquitous. Somebody says, well, they work at a coffee shop, they make a great cup of coffee. They'll probably also make a great coffee shop manager. But the reality is the skill set for making a great cup of coffee is so different from managing a person, writing them up, encouraging them, training them. Those are different skill sets. And I think the same exact thing happens here in business world. We just
Oh,
say,
definitely.
a great salesperson, they're probably a great sales manager. And so I love hearing that.
Yeah, it's not an automatic. It's not a one, two, three, etc. Not everybody has the capability to be a good sales manager, good sales leader. Not everybody has the capability to be a good field sales guy.
Mhm.
Not everybody wants to do some. It's few that have the talent to bridge that gap, and we'll talk about bridging the gap later on. And listen, these 10 points we're talking about, I've been guilty on several of these. I've had that talk, when in my earlier days, etc. There's a reason I've grown in experience, and I've been fortunate. Like I said, I've had good leaders who've talked me through it. But
Yeah.
Definitely, like one of the ones, and one of the ones that I've fallen victim to is, leadership style. The If you aren't aware of, you can read 1,000 books, there's different ways to approach it, but you can't just pick one and expect everybody to follow it, I guess is the point. It's
Mhm.
got to be situational. Yes, obviously you can lead by example, you can be a director or a coach, supporting, you can delegate. These are all categories and they're great and they do work, but ultimately as a sales leader, you need to be flexible. You need to understand which leadership style is effective for the situation in which my organization's having. So I find that many business owners go up to their newly hired or newly promoted sales leader and say, "Hey, what's going on? Are you this? Are you that? Why are you like a General Patton just barking out orders to everybody?" It doesn't work. It works for some people, but not for everybody. So you got to stop that. As a business owner, you got to tell and train your sales leader to be more flexible and to be situational in their approach to leadership.
Hmm.
Where we'll go to, I feel like David Letterman going down to top 10 there.
Oh, I missed it.
uh,
William.
and okay, so here's one I've been guilty of in my early when I was newly appointed as a sales manager in one company, taking over the field interaction, and this happens heavily when you get promoted from within, especially if you were that top producer. You know, incredibly enough, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, organizations tend to promote their top sales guy. And you know that guy is a hunter. He's used to being out in the field and just taking over the scenario, talking, close that deal, less. Or they're not going to allow other people to interact. And you've got to let the salespeople lead that call. Yes, you should go out in the field with your team, absolutely, but you got to be in a supportive role and not there to take over the field interaction. You're not the guy who's doing the discovery. You're just hanging out with the guy who's doing the discovery. So that's a big one there.
And that's a hard one, Eddie, because I know that in my own professional journey, as I was placed in positions of management, I would often feel the urge, and maybe this is just like primal instinct, to jump in and to just jump in and say, I know how to solve this problem. I know to answer this question. We don't need to dance around it for too long. I've got the solution. But sometimes you just got to let your report do it, right? So that they can learn.
Primal intuition. You're absolutely right. You're the hunter. I mean, your top producers are top producers for a reason. They're out there, they're aggressive, this, that, the other. It's a totally different thing to be a sales leader because you obviously some sales leaders retain those key accounts and
Yeah.
they do well, etc. But you've got to be a coach for the rest of them. You got to lead by example. You got to be flexible based on the situation. But ultimately, you got to let the people do their job. Even if they crash and burn, there's always something to be learned from that. You know, just don't let them crash and burn consistently. That's another problem.
That's slide number 4, right?
All right. There we go. Yeah, and this basically goes into the same thing. And some of these are, like I said, a little bit redundant or really tied together. But you're not a salesperson anymore. Yeah, and sales business owners, it just blows their mind. They don't get it. They think just because the business card has manager instead of salesperson, that person who they've newly promoted is going to be able to switch their mindset one night after another, and it doesn't work that day. This is all behavior, and if anybody listening has kids, you know that behavior takes a while to modify. You know, it doesn't matter how many times you put them in the corner or take their allowance. It's going to take a while to modify that behavior. So if you're a business owner and you just promoted somebody because he's the best and the top producer, don't be surprised if he continues to act like a salesperson instead of a sales manager. Don't be surprised if he continues to not talk to you as a business owner and tell you about the business, but instead focuses only on the customer, etc. So coaching once again. So here's a big one, a fundamental for every business, and especially those that survive on the cash flow, on monthly cash flow. You got to stop the inaccurate forecasting. Business owners, once again, they promote the top salesperson. He's a closer. He may not necessarily be or have been great at forecasting, nor does he necessarily understand the importance of forecasting beyond just the sales role. Without a proper forecast, your chief of operations won't know how many systems to build, products to build, etc. Without accurate forecasting, your finance guy won't want to know what kind of cash is coming in to sustain the business, to meet payroll, to pay out commissions, etc. So salespeople in general, they want to do everything by gut and feel, and that's fine when you're a field sales guy. But when you're a sales leader, sales manager, you've got to forecast. So business owners, if you're sitting down there and say, why is my forecasting inaccurate? You may want to think about, did you pull the trigger too soon on the promotion? Or more importantly, what steps did I do before I promoted this person?
Yeah, and actually we did a whole presentation on this last week, how to do some pretty complicated forecasting depending on your industry. And if anybody is interested in learning more about that, I can send out a link after this. Just DM me, hit me up, and I can shoot you over that as well.
Was that the one with John Mark?
Yeah, that was.
Oh yeah, see, sales acceleration. We're here to support the small and medium-sized businesses.
There we go.
Hey, what a plug! I keep on going. Stop micromanaging people, and as you can see, 8, 9, 7, and 6 are all kind of similar. It's basically you got a coach. Your sales leader first and foremost is a coach. You're not going to. Not every quarterback in the NFL will end up being a team manager because they may not be built for it. But there are some successful players that become coaches, and that's great, but you've got to be aware of that before you do that promotion, before you make the hiring. Uh, you've got to look at the sales leadership at your team and determine how each individual builds up their pipeline for the organization, what their contribution is overall. But you can't micromanage. Having a sales call every day for an hour or two is micromanagement. It's
Mhm.
taking time away from the field. Salespeople belong in front of the customers. A sales manager, a sales leader definitely needs to have time with the sales team on a weekly, at least weekly basis to go over things. So remember that, micromanagement, that's a key thing.
Yeah, and actually, on that note, I'm a big fan of this concept of organizational physics. And if you haven't read that book, it might be something interesting to pick up. But in organizational physics, they present the idea that in an organization, every role lands on a basically like an x-axis of the role is totally autonomous or needs to be totally autonomous, or the role is totally controlled and needs to be totally controlled. So examples would be
Oh,
on
okay.
the controlled side would be like a CFO or like a bookkeeper is probably way more on the controlled side. They have to follow a process. They have to do it the same way every time. They have to be meticulous in order for that role to be successful. However, if you run all the way to the other side of that line where a salesperson probably sits, it's autonomous. They really need to be able to make decisions on the fly. You need to be able to trust that they are making decisions that are in the best interest of the sale, the customer, the company, all of those things. They need to be given a lot of freedom to do that. And so I think this slide number
Yeah,
6 here is speaking to that. You need to manage them, you need to hold them accountable, but you need to give them a long leash so that they can, of course, stumble, fall, and learn from that, but
of
also
course.
flex the power of autonomy to really push deals forward and make things happen.
Yep. Otherwise, you'll face stagnation. Listen, you may be the sales leader of a team of 3. Okay, micromanagement's not that hard. Yeah, it's not effective, but it's not that hard. But if you have 10, 20 functional people reporting to you, there's no way you're going to be effective for the organization. You need tools. You need to be able to coach. You need to delegate. You need to trust. Ultimately, your team needs to trust you, and you need to trust them.
Right on.
And that comes into, stop the sales rep tenure. If that trust doesn't exist, I mean, people are going to leave you. And I've had business owners go, I hired this new guy, or I promoted this new guy, and all of a sudden half the team left. Well, guess what? There's probably a reason. If that person, if that leader isn't able to provide a good value proposition, which is 101 of sales, of himself, of his style, people are going to leave. Nobody wants to work for a bad boss, or a boss they're not going to learn from. You know,
Right.
you've got to be able to satisfy the personal desires of your sales team, but without losing control of it, obviously. And the key thing about sales rep turnover, everybody's so ready to fire somebody. Well, when that sales rep leaves, they're taking with them the customer relationships they've built over whatever time they've been in your organization. That is future revenue, and that's going to hurt your business more so than getting rid of the sales rep. Now, obviously, bad sales people, yeah, unfortunately, that's the reality. Not everybody's cut out to be sales. They should be let go, but don't have them leave. Make sure that they're in an environment where they will succeed. Otherwise, you're not only going to lose the talent, you're going to lose the revenue that is generated by that talent.
Yeah, and in my experience, salespeople are just like anybody else. They need process. They need
Yeah.
coaching. They need help along the way, because if you just throw them out and say, hey, make it rain for me, it probably won't happen. And when it doesn't happen, they get discouraged. You get discouraged. You don't handle that well. And next thing you know, 3 to 6 months later, they do turn over. They do quit because their experience was bad. They're pointing the finger at you. Your experience was bad. You're pointing the finger at them. And in my opinion, the onus has to land on the company and the leadership at the company. You have to be able to support them, give them process, give them coaching, training, give them what they need to be successful. Because if you don't, of course, they won't be, and you can't blame them for that.
Exactly. You can only blame yourself. And I had actually a presentation at one of the WeWorks a couple of months ago about that, creating an environment for success and allowing other people to succeed. And you're right on the money there, Joe. Again, yeah, you have to have the tools. I mean, it's not just the personality. Obviously, that is a key component. You've got to create that relationship. But if you don't establish the tools, the processes that allow these people to succeed, to earn money, and to make money for your organization, they're going to leave. You're going to have a high amount of turnover. And guess what? Your customers and people talk. The market knows, oh, I don't want to deal with XYZ. They're changing sales guys every 30 days. They don't have their act together. So nobody wants your services or your product.
Right.
Oh, here's a big one. Okay, so accountability. If you're promoting from within, especially, is this guy temperamental? Is he blaming everybody else for failures of the organization? Leaders need to be accountable to both themselves and to the people they work for. Everybody needs to be held accountable, and that goes back to creating an environment for success. If there's no accountability in the organization, then people are going to wait, or there's going to be a perception that people are getting away with things. A sales leader needs to understand that as a leader, they have to accept responsibilities for failures. And that's one of the hardest things to do. I've left several organizations. I've been let go of several organizations. But when I've been let go, I've accepted the responsibility of what I could have done better. It's easy to say, oh, yeah, my boss is a butthead, or, I can't believe they did this. But in the end, I'd rather turn it around and accept, okay, as a leader, I need to take responsibility for what it is. And whether I didn't understand the corporate culture or I made some bad calls, it's on me. And that's fine. I mean, nobody wants to lose their job, but as a professional in the sales functional group, you've got to learn to accept responsibility for what you're doing.
So I want to unpack this just a little bit, if that's okay, because
of course,
to me, this one is a challenge. This is a challenge because we said several slides earlier that you don't want to micromanage them. So now we're walking a fine line between I'm holding you accountable, but I'm not micromanaging you. And so if we could, let's just talk a little about what does that look like in practice, and maybe specifically, what is the check-in rhythm? Do I check in with them daily? Do I check in with them weekly, monthly, quarterly? And when I do, what am I looking at? Am I looking at numbers of calls? Am I looking at numbers of
exactly.
like how does this work? Paint a picture.
No, you're absolutely right. And what you hold accountable are your ability to achieve specific goals.
Okay.
So as a sales leader, your job is to provide direction and give goals to each one of your team members. And it's not just how much you're going to sell, what your target is. I mean, that's the easiest. Obviously, okay, you've got to hit 1 million this year. You've either done it or not. All right, black and white. But there should be a lot of other subsets of different goals. How many calls are you making a week? How many customer visits are you making a week? How many proposals are you submitting? What is the volume in terms of dollars of your weekly proposals? Now, based on that, as a sales leader, you establish a rhythm, a consistent rhythm of meeting with them to review those specific goals. And then the tactics they've used, what have they done on a daily basis to work towards the goals? That's what you're holding accountable. Everybody should be held accountable, but for that, you need to have metrics. You have to have specific goals, whether it's organizational, whether it's sales goals, etc. I would say at the minimum, actually, I shouldn't say, at the most, a week, one meeting a week should hit that requirement, check that box. in terms of being able to hold your individual team members accountable and then moving forward. And the funniest thing, I had this debate at one point, how much time do you actually spend with your team? And you start thinking about it, at least in my experience, once again, it's not a lot. Yeah, an email interaction, a quick phone call, it's not really engaging with that individual team member. So if you're able to at least give that person an hour a week of your time to both hold them accountable as well as coach them on everything they're doing, that's going to be great. You're going to see a major difference in overall revenue growth and overall productivity.
And I might add to that, coach them, hold them accountable, but also encourage them, because if you've been in sales for any amount of time, you know that what you work on today is feeding what happens 90 days from now. So like the 30-day rule, what you do in this 30 days is what's going to come to fruition 90 days from now. So if 90 days from now you are not hitting your goals, there's not a whole lot you can do about that right there in that 90 days. You have to look back and say, well, that's because I didn't do the key activities that would create that type of momentum now. And so when that happens, they're going to get discouraged. And I think you have to keep them encouraged, because every salesperson goes through those slumps. You gotta build up and say, hey, look, it's happening because of this, and there might not be anything you can do about that to fix it right now to meet these goals, but you can start tomorrow getting back on track with your daily prospecting activities, and that will yield fruit, 60, 90 days from now. So I think that's a huge part too, is not just coming down on the fact that they didn't hit goals, but also encouraging them to continue to do the behaviors that will help them hit those goals.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And as you can tell, the solutions are quite varied, and then you have to tailor them to the individual. You got to know your team ultimately, and especially those leading indicators. There's so many. I mean, if you do a Google search, you'll get 10, 20, 30 different leading indicators. Which one to use? Which one do you implement? Well, sorry, that's why we go back to the situational leadership that we talked on the first slide, because it all depends on what's going on, what market you're in, the size of the organization, etc.
Right.
Okay, here's the big one. And this is one that I learned the hard way. And I had a great sales leader who really made me data driven in terms of metrics. And yeah, he was clear. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. If it's not in the CRM, if you don't know what sales stage it is, etc., it doesn't exist. You simply cannot manage it. And sales leaders need to adopt metrics. And to your point earlier, coach people to utilize metrics. Fill in the CRM. Don't be lazy about that. Put in the basic fields and work it. Use it to your advantage. It's a tool meant to assist with productivity, not kill productivity. So a properly designed CRM by Digitopia will definitely help you in being more productive, for your teams to be productive. If your team's productive, it'll lead to revenue growth. And you go ahead.
No, go ahead, finish, please.
I'm reading one of the questions here. I don't know if you want to read that one.
Yeah. So from Andy, what key metrics would one track to ensure energy allocation, momentum, and flow are being effectively managed?
Well, that's interesting. Energy allocation, and I'm assuming that that by that means the salesperson's time and if it's moving forward. Well, pipeline is an easy one. Sales stages and pipeline. Is the pipeline growing? It's showing that the salesperson themselves are actually working out there, hustling and getting it done. And then the sales stages within that pipeline, it will tell you if they're consistently still touching upon those things that they started, or are they? And I've seen some sales stages languish 200 days. Listen, the CRMs now, they'll tell you down to the nitty gritty on the details. And what I've always loved about it, once they were implemented, they tell you how many days it's been since somebody touched an opportunity. And I've seen opportunities out there 250 days, 300 days, 100, whatever. If it goes beyond 30 days, depending on the sales cycle, okay, I'll put that out there, then something's wrong. That momentum is not happening. And that's what you have to really focus on moving forward. So, Andy, in terms of your question, I've got to generalize it because I'm not sure what industry you're in or what kind of team you're at. But if you would ask me in general terms, I said pipeline and sales stage management are definitely those leading indicators that tells me if the team is energized, if they're allocating their time correctly, and it should allow the sales leader to effectively manage the process.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think also when you talk about using a CRM, I think a lot of companies have a CRM, and most of them are relying on, the superpower that the CRM brings, that the CRM company is pitching, right? Like HubSpot even. I'm a huge fan of HubSpot. HubSpot says, buy HubSpot, and all of a sudden all your problems are solved. You're going to get in here and it can literally do everything. But the reality is it can do everything, but it really needs a good pilot, and it needs some good rules built into it so that when a salesperson's using it, they are not just either forgetting to fill out certain required fields or they're filling them out lazily. And you can set up your CRM with rules and validation to make sure that when they go to log a call, or they go to add an email, or they go to update the record, it does validate and say, hey, hold on, you missed this, this, and this. You've got to fill this out because we need that data in order to have accurate reporting. So I would say, what I see often there's a danger in CRMs, and it's that you think you buy it and it's going to solve your problems. And when it doesn't solve your problems 30, 60 days later, you kind of give up on it and get lazy. But that's not the answer. The answer is to dial it in specific to your organization.
And incredibly enough, that ties exactly into promoting from within. So if you just promote your best sales guy, who may or may not be data driven and may or not believe in that CRM, next thing you know, the entire team is not going to, if he doesn't believe in the CRM, if he hasn't had a history of doing it, the rest of the team is not going to do it. Who are you now to tell me I need to use the CRM if you didn't do it? And you were very successful.
Yeah. And real quick, back to Andy's question one more time. I think one of the big metrics that we like to look at is sales velocity. So taking your average sales price and dividing it by the average sales cycle length times 1,000, and really understanding, like, just because I have a lot of deals here, are we moving them quickly? Are we actually going to hit our targets based on, how we're working these deals and optimizing that, getting that shorter and shorter, getting that velocity number to actually optimize is I think a big one that a lot of people ignore.
Yeah, no, great. And I just saw Mark Schuler popped in. Great guy, by the way. Knows his stuff as well from the sales side. Another sales acceleration alumni. He's absolutely right. Behavior and or knowing the behavior, creating the proper behavior, best way to track and make sure you're effective for success.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
I love the fact that it pops up and I can read in real time. Oh, okay. Here we go. I did have a business owner just talk to me about their new sales leader, and she's like, I can't believe there's no revenue growth. I can't believe it's inconsistent. And as I dive deeper into it, yeah, guess what? He had hired from within, and he had no training. He had hired his best guy. He figures he knows the market and everything else. But that once again doesn't mean the sales leader necessarily that you put into that spot knows the importance of revenue growth. Remember, salespeople, for the most part, are compensated on bookings. They just want to close the deal. And booking and revenue are two different things. If you ask a finance guy, they'll definitely lecture on that. The booking, you just close the deal, but you can't necessarily realize the money that's coming in. That's what's called revenue, depending on what industry you're in. So you got to know how to maintain revenue growth. Otherwise, if your sales leader doesn't know it, you as a business owner are going to have to teach them that, or you're going to have this conversation. What the hell's going on? Why is there no revenue growth? And it could be for a variety of things. If once again, maybe they don't know how to cultivate their team, or maybe, and I have seen this, and I've also been a little bit guilty of this myself, is you try to help those people, that are not doing that well. And you made a good point. Obviously, sales cycles are up and down. But when you see a consistency in the inability to close deals because of multiple things, you got to let the guy go, or the gal go, or the person go, etc. You can't tolerate poor performance. So you can try to coach people to get better, but ultimately, you've got to, as a manager, as a sales leader, you have to do what's right for the business and for the team as well. Because if the rest of the team sees that there's this one person who's never getting their numbers. They just stay home. They're in the visiting a customer a week or whatever, and yet they're still getting benefits and base pay and this, that, the other. What's going to incentivize them to work hard? So you got to think about stuff like that.
So, just as a point of clarity, Eddie, are we talking about new revenue growth or expansion revenue from existing accounts?
Oh, it could be both. If gaining existing, and excuse me, recurring revenue from existing accounts is, I'm not going to say easy, but it's naturally easier than trying to get revenue from new business. But in this case, it can be both. If you're a sales leader, if you put that person, and actually I have a call with the company next week, they're interested not in the recurring revenue because they're doing quite good on the referrals and the expansion. They want to know why their new business, new revenue from new business is not happening. So we're going to have a deep dive next week on that, and we'll see where it leads to.
Yeah, because I think I get the question, not a lot, but I've had it several times, which is, should I have somebody focused on new revenue growth and then they hand it off to an account manager that grows and expands it? Or does that salesperson keep that book of business and they're responsible for going back and loving on that client and customer, making sure they're getting what they thought they paid for, and then of course looking for opportunities to expand it themselves? What would you recommend? And maybe it's different for every business.
I have to say and plead that in. I know it's kind of like a deflecting, like a presidential debate here, but it depends on the business. It on one side, it's simple in terms of if you do that kind of structure where once you get an account, it goes to an account manager, then you're increasing your payroll. Basically,
Yeah.
that's one way of looking, and that's not a bad thing. Obviously, if your business is profitable enough to do it, etc. And on the positive side, by doing that, you're decreasing the time that that hunter is trying to farm or nurture an
Right.
existing account. So I hate putting it this way, but it's situational. I'd have to sit down with the business and determine which is the best path forward. And guess what? There is not one path forward. If it
Yeah.
doesn't work after 6 months, try something different. All I ever tell business owners is try it, but don't think you failed if you've only allowed a month or two for it to come to fruition. You got to give it time to, once again, we go back to behavior. It's customer behavior, market behavior, internal behaviors. You got to give it time, then assess, and then determine the next path forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really fair answer because you do have to sit down and figure out the exact situation with every business and kind of coach through that. Because if it were a one size fits all, someone would write that playbook and we'd all not be having this webinar right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in organizations that do exactly what that is, but the account doesn't necessarily go to BD or sales. It goes to a project manager, and that
Right.
project manager is tasked with obviously executing on the deliverable. But guess what? Everybody's in sales. They also are tasked with trying to generate additional profitability out of that, either by cutting costs or by increasing the ultimate deliverable.
Absolutely.
And the top, stop losing customers. I've had business owners, oh, why am I'm losing customers? They don't want to come back. You know, people buy from people. And if you put the sales leader in there without any support, without creating an environment for success, they're going to lose people or they'll get flustered and leave themselves. And ultimately, they're going to take, as we talked about earlier, they're going to take their customers with them. Or the customers will just not want to deal with the new guy because they don't like him, they don't like his approach, they think this, that, the other. It takes a long while, and this is, I think, ultimately the most important aspect of what we're talking about today. If you're going to promote or you're going to hire, you got to think it through, especially if you're going to promote, because your top salesperson, if you promote him to sales leader, first you're immediately losing that sales revenue that guy was earning. All right. And then if he fails as a sales leader and ends up leaving the business, you're really in a bad situation because you've got an entire fiscal year, maybe 2, 3, or several sales cycles to recover from that. And that's hard. And, we've all seen the numbers on hiring this talent. There is a lot of talent out there, but there's a lot of people who want that talent in their own organization. So you get what you pay for in the end.
Yeah.
So that those are, like I said, these are talking points that the business owner will most probably have at some point with their sales leader when they start pulling their hair and figuring out what the hell's going on. What did I do? Why did I promote, etc. So before promoting, before hiring, you make sure you, especially in promotion, make sure you identify the gaps. Just because the guy brings in 60% of your revenue doesn't mean he is a sales leader.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And remember, once again, if you promote him to sales leader, that 60% needs to be taken by somebody else. So you need to make sure a lot of these knowledge gaps, does the sales person, future sales leader, have an understanding of forecasting, have an understanding of coaching teams, have an understanding of leadership roles, etc. Uh, these are specific gaps that you need to either bridge. Well, excuse me, you just need to bridge. And the way you bridge them basically is training and tools. And this is regardless of organizational size, because I've been, once again, in Fortune 500, and I've been in organizations that are 15 million in revenue. It's incredible the lack of training that happens, and in many instances, tools as well. Organizations either don't have a CRM or don't have ongoing training. I've talked to business owners and like, well, they're just a natural salesperson. Uh, well, that's yes and no. A natural salesperson is just somebody who likes to talk, who gains empathy, has that ability to drive a message, a point. But if you want them to eventually, or if that person wants to eventually go up the ladders and become a sales leader, you need to provide the training. You have to create an environment for success. I'm not saying you have to spend millions a year on training, but you should allocate a percentage of your budget to ongoing training and make sure you have a consistent plan within your organization.
Yeah, Eddie, I think that this is a great point, because when we talk about promoting a sales manager, I would have to imagine in most cases that's a little bit of a smaller business who is now growing, scaling, expanding. So they now need a sales manager for the first time. And the reality in that situation is it's probably the owner or one of the executives that is promoting that person who they themselves may not be a trained salesperson. So
Correct.
they can't actually offer the training that you're talking about here for that person because they themselves are not. Now, that may be a business owner who's had a lot of success in sales, but in my experience, a lot of business owners that have a lot of success in sales is just because they are passionate about their project. They're passionate
Absolutely.
about what they're doing. They care so much, they'll stay up all night long to make it happen. And that's a little bit different than somebody who is a hired gun coming in to help support your passion. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's something hard to transfer when you yourself as the business owner or an executive don't even have those skills that you need to be coaching, right?
That you're absolutely correct. And business owners who stay up all night working on this sales side or other functional aspects of the business, they really are not will. They need to accept that there's a problem first and foremost, and then see how they can obtain some relief from that problem. It's not as simple as buying a book on Amazon or listening to a nice webinar, and ongoing. The solution is more of a long term, and you've got to invest in your business, just like you invest in talent. You've got to invest in making the people you have, your human capital, talented. And fortunately, through Sales Acceleration and Metis Advance, we do offer solutions for this, for the training aspect. There's plenty of other companies that also provide solutions. So I'm by far not the only one. I have my own style on the training. Everybody does. But as a business owner, you owe it to your organization to make that type of investment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, speaking of, so one of the cool things about being with Sales Acceleration as a group, they do a lot of market surveys, of the natural small and medium-sized businesses that we gravitate around, and they found that in the organizations, most of these organizations, a huge portion of the sales manager, the sales leader, lack, and they want sales leadership training. They don't want to get yelled about the forecast. They don't understand how it ties to the bigger picture. And not every sales leader has an MBA or a doctorate or etc. So these are things that you've got to think about. And 80% of those companies that so far in that pool just don't have a budget for training. You know, they've got a budget for everything else, but they don't have a training. And that for me, it seems ludicrous. Once again, in my career path, as I transitioned from field to management, I made it a number one of my number one priorities is to establish some sort of budget for sales training for both my field sales and my leaders, etc. Whether it's how to give a proper PowerPoint presentation for your field salespeople, because nobody likes somebody who just reads off the PowerPoint, or for sales leaders, you know, what does the word metrics really mean? What is a forecast? Why is it so important, etc.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably track real ROI back from those training dollars, because even if that training results in even a 2% boost in your conversion to close, you probably do the math on that and say, hey, that training, I got 3x out of that training cost or whatever it is.
Exactly, and that's the other thing. Business leaders, business owners, you invest. You need to track the return on investment, and quite frankly, you should get a return on investment. If you're going to invest in human capital and training your sales leader and your sales team, there should be a noticeable growth in the overall revenue that you're. It's not going to happen overnight. Once again, the behavior has to set in, but 6 months or definitely a year down the road, there should be a significant spike in growth or profitability, which is even better, because at least now you're focused on how the business operates and what to do effectively and efficiently to maximize that profitability.
Absolutely.
All right. So what to do? Number one, I'm always here to help everybody out. You don't necessarily have to hire me to send me a question, although contracts are always welcome. But you should take action. First of all, do a self-assessment. Determine what the state of your business is in terms of the sales functionality. There should be a link. I'll try to post it here. If not, Joe will get it out to everyone, where you can take a free self-assessment and you'll get a report on exactly, based on the responses to specific questions, what you should be considering. It's not going to resolve your problems, but it will provide you with data, meaningful information for you to take action. If I am available via LinkedIn, my website is up, and I'm always here to help everybody else in their revenue growth desires.
Awesome. And just for anybody who's catching this either live or on a recorded version of this later, this deck will be available. I'll send it out through DMs to everybody who's joined today or everybody who's registered for today. We'll also make the link available with the YouTube video that'll be on the Digitopia channel. So you will be able to find this. If you need to get a hold of Eddie and you don't remember how, you can just look for this presentation, and there'll be a link to get over to him. On that note, if you also need any help with your CRM setup, so if you have a sales process and you need it dialed in on your CRM, whether that's HubSpot, Salesforce, or otherwise, DM me, because that is what we do. And we also consult all the time on those types of technical issues with CRMs without any sort of actual engagement or contract in place. So we just like to have the conversation. So if you need actual sales process help, if you need help with your sales manager, hit up Eddie. If you need some help with the technology of it, hit up me. We're both here to help you. Zach, thank you. This was awesome. Mark, yes, thank you. We really appreciate you guys joining, the participation. I hope you got something out of this today. And again, follow-up questions are more than welcome. So DM either one of us, and we will be sending this out afterwards.
Yep. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, everybody who's attending. And once again, more than happy to help you out.
Thank you, guys.